Harold. That Halloween, young Thomas Milner considered running over the scarecrow. The thought had occurred to him many times before. Ever since he'd gotten his learner's permit, Tommy had fantasized about using his car like one of the threshers on the family farm. His cruel mouth would split into a smile, and his knuckles would whiten on the steering wheel as he imagined mowing down the straw man like some oversized bale of wheat. Yes, Tommy had always hated that scarecrow, hated the tattered sun-bleached clothes it wore, hated the way its cut-out eyes always remained in shadow, almost seemed to be staring at Tommy like two unblinking sockets. Hated the way it never actually scared away any crows, although truth be told, Tommy did like how the big black birds made the useless dummy their own personal toilet. But most of all, Tommy hated the scarecrow's name, Harold. Tommy's mom had named the ugly thing not long after she assembled it from old clothes, burlap, and hay. And Tommy knew how much his mom liked to play with dolls, even as a grown woman. Just as Tommy knew that's what she called the scarecrow, he could have seen that name coming from an acre away. The sound of the Pontiac's tires scratching against gravel brought Tommy back to the present. He jerked his steering wheel to the side, returning the car to the road and off its collision course with Harold. "Next time, ugly," Tommy muttered, smelling the liquor on his own breath. As he turned down the driveway and drove past Harold, the scarecrow's moonlit face just stared, same as always, from its crooked stake in the ground. Reaching the farmhouse at the end of the drive, Tommy killed the engine and staggered out of the driver's seat. He reeked of beer, ashes, and something far more pungent. "Punks are dead," Tommy slurred at the brown streaks on his jeans and Letterman jacket. His scorched fingers still smarted from where they swatted against the flaming paper bag. Tommy had picked up a couple of guys from their varsity team and that girl he was seeing on the side, Ruth. Although the Pontiac was never a car Tommy would have chosen for himself, he had to admit it held a lot of teenagers. The plan was to have a little fun with a few of the trick-or-treaters wandering around Mill Valley. Then, they'd all head to the Gorge Drive-In so Tommy could drink more, and he and Ruth could have a little fun of a different kind. And then Tommy would take Ruth to dinner, like he promised. If he felt like it. Maybe. Or maybe Tommy would see if the Wolverton girl was up for a little fun instead. But then those three losers from school had to ruin everything. They ambushed Tommy and his friends, egging his car, and tossing a burning paper bag through the open window. It landed on Tommy's lap, and he slapped out the flames quick enough. For a moment, Tommy figured his quick reflexes might impress Ruth and make her even more infatuated with him. That's when the stench hit Tommy, and he realized the paper bag hadn't been empty. Brown stuff coated his hands and clothes. Growing up on a farm, Tommy had smelled all kinds of scat. Pigs, horses, cows, chickens, but this wasn't any animals. This came from a person. The memory made Tommy gag in his driveway. Somehow, he managed to keep it down. He looked at the fresh dent in his fender and the scratches on the hood's paint job, all from when Tommy crashed into a fence. "It was the smoke in my eyes," Tommy had told Ruth, and the others after the fender bender. "From the bag!" And that's what Tommy continued to tell himself outside the farmhouse. He hadn't had too much to drink. He hadn't lost control of the car. Tommy Milner was always in control. Tommy thought he heard a laugh. He glared across the cornfield at Harold. The way the moon cast shadows across the scarecrow's face made him look like he was smiling. Like it was smiling, Tommy corrected himself. Another autumn wind blew through the stalks, and Tommy heard more laughter. He turned his back on Harold and stumbled toward the porch, only to be greeted at the front door by his mother. She drew her bathrobe tighter around the nape of her neck, shuddering at the rising chill. So much for hitting the hay, thought Tommy. It's late, barked Mrs. Milner. It's Halloween, Tommy said back. All the way across the porch, Mrs. Milner could smell her son's boozy breath. She even recognized the brand of beer. Like father, like son, thought Mrs. Milner. You were supposed to deliver eggs to the Wolvertons, she said instead. Just hearing the word eggs made Tommy think of his defiled Pontiac. The yolks that splattered against his windshield had clearly been rancid. A whiff of sulfur, coupled with the feces still staining his prized jacket, induced another wave of nausea in Tommy's guts. He forced himself not to vomit and not talk back to his mother. Tommy didn't need another lecture from some disapproving old lady. He was a man now, just turned 18, independent, enlisted. Come graduation from Mill Valley High, Tommy would be leaving their farm, leaving their dead-end town, and leaving their family. Well, what was left of their family. After a few weeks of basic, he and his platoon would be well on their way to distant fields of another kind, mowing down a different sort of target altogether. The happy thought settled Tommy's stomach. He turned on his heels, ignoring Mrs. Milner's glare, and flippantly sauntered off toward the barn. Along the way, Tommy kicked aside one of the pea-brained chickens that riddled the farm, then sensed another pair of eyes boring into him. This felt different from his mother's usual glower. Looking over his shoulder, Tommy saw Mrs. Milner had left the porch and gone back inside the farmhouse. The only figure left staring at him now was Harold, that same worthless grin on his false face. It's false face, Tommy reminded himself. His ruined jacket scuffed against the barn door as he shoved it open. The place reeked of stale hay, mildew, and urine. He heard skittering sounds in the dark, like bird talons on corrugated metal, or pitchfork tines against something just as hard, like rock or bone. Tommy didn't know why that image popped into his head. He wasn't a poet or writer like that girl. What's her name? The one who ignored Tommy's repeated invitations to join him under the bleachers. The one who helped those other two nerds lob the flaming bag into his Catalina. After the crash, Tommy and his pals had chased the three of them, the stuck-up girl, that beanpole with the divorced parents. Yes, Tommy made it to the gorge after all, although his definition of fun had changed considerably by that point. He spotted the three losers inside a parked 63 Rambler Ambassador with some wetback greaser. The four of them refused to get out of the car, no matter how hard Tommy slammed on the windows. After a while, Tommy gave up, mostly to shut up the drive-in manager, but also to dupe those little vandals into feeling safe. This was a classic combat tactic, as Tommy had been reading in the materials supplied by the recruiting office. This was how a soldier coaxed an enemy out of hiding. This was war. And so Tommy waited, forcing Ruth to stay with him even after his Letterman pals departed, until the Rambler drove away from the drive-in. The Pontiac followed the wetback's car, headlights off, until they reached the old Bellows place at the edge of town. Tommy waited for the four kids to go inside the dilapidated heap of a house before running over to the empty Rambler. He smashed its windshield, slashed its tires, and wrenched as many cables out of the engine block as his furious hands could hold. He then broke open the trunk, hoping for something of value to steal, but found a can of spray paint instead. Over Ruth's protest, he wrote the word wet on the Rambler Rambler's hood and the word back on its burgled trunk. Tommy snickered in the barn, just as he had after finishing his graffiti earlier that night. Maybe he was a poet or a writer after all. Just like what's-her-name with a final chuckle, Tommy fumbled for the barn's overhead light and turned it on. The bulb immediately burned out with a loud that made him flinch. Darkness returned to the barn. Yet this darkness felt different from the one that had preceded the flickering bulb. It felt deeper, heavier, as if a shadow descended upon the entire structure. Tommy's alcohol-addled mind now pictured a colossal crow landing on the barn roof, its black wings blotting out the moon like some unforeseen eclipse. Tommy muttered angrily and crossed over to the chicken coop. Still consumed by his own seething resentment, he nearly missed the shape that appeared in the water trough beside him. A persistent drip from the leaky faucet used to wash out milking pails had disturbed the water's surface. But the water suddenly went as still and smooth as glass. In the reflection, Tommy thought he saw a pale shape. Once again, Tommy flinched, but when he looked back at the trough, it was a murky, rippling pool once more. He noticed he was sweating in the cold, smelling the liquor through his pores. He opened the hutch and gathered a dozen eggs, his movements faster than they had been a moment ago. Fine, thought Tommy, his mind racing as fast as his hands. I'll deliver eggs to the Wolvertons, then I'll see if their daughter's still up for more fun than Ruth and what's-her-name. He shuttered the coop, deposited the eggs in their basket, and got up to leave. But the sight of blood made Tommy stop. A chicken carcass festered on the ground, gore pasting straw and loose feathers to what remained of its body. Tommy looked to the side and saw the perpetrators. The other chickens had pecked it to death. Bits of down and flesh clung to their red beaks. Their beady eyes glinted in the night, staring at him as if he were less than a man. Tommy heard another skittering sound, followed by the keen of a faraway voice. The Milner voice spun around with a start. Another autumn wind blew through the barn, rattling its ramshackle walls and riling the crows in the rafters. The murder flapped and cawed. Tommy took the eggs and left for the last time. He went back toward the Pontiac and reached for the driver's side door handle. But when he looked up at the porch, he saw the silhouette of a woman. "Jesus!" cried Tommy, nearly dropping half a dozen. He caught the eggs before their shells dashed on the driveway, then faced the front of the farmhouse again. The woman stepped closer. It was his mother, her robe wrapped about her like a shroud, her stern posture backlit by the bug zapper hanging on the porch. "What do you think you're doing?" demanded Mrs. Milner. "Delivering the eggs," Tommy said pointedly. "Not in my car," Mrs. Milner said before she looked closer at the damaged Pontiac. "My car and your clothes. Is that chocolate? What did you do?" "Ma, it wasn't me," Tommy shouted back. "May as well have been," shrieked his mother. "When I lend you my property, you have a responsibility to return it the way you found it." "But," Tommy began. "You'd better clean that mess before your father sees," said Mrs. Milner. Tommy gestured. "Fine!" with an impatient wave of his hands, and made toward the hose and bucket at the side of their home. But when he stopped in mid-step, when his mother cleared her throat and added, "After you've delivered those eggs to the Wolvertons." "How am I supposed to do that without my car?" "My car!" Mrs. Milner insisted. "And you could do it the way you did before you learned to drive and drink." She pointed across the cornfield to another farmhouse about a mile away. Its lit windows twinkled remotely from the top of the hill. "Walk," said Tommy's mother. Sighing, he clutched the egg basket tighter and stomped away from the porch. Tommy took the path that cut through the cornfield, his pickled feet stumbling over the furrows, plowed into the earth. He walked past Harold, still on the pike, still staring. For a second time that night, Tommy considered inflicting harm on the scarecrow. It wouldn't have been the first time he used him, as a punching bag. Tommy often snuck off to the field and worked out his aggressions on the lumpy straw figure, just as Tommy's father had demonstrated in his own way so often before. And on this night, Harold was in the way, and Tommy was in a mean mood. "Eat shit, Harold," said Tommy before continuing on his way. Typical, he thought, as he marched through the field. "Give me your car, only to take it away, lay out clothes for me every morning like I'm still some little kid. I know what you're doing, trying to control me, keep me from leaving for the war, keep me clinging to your apron strings, keep me like another one of your little dress-up doll." Tommy's chain of thought broke off abruptly. His eyes widened. He saw that he was walking past Harold again, still on the pike, still staring. Confused, Tommy turned around. He had just left Harold 50 feet back. Hadn't he? Maybe Tommy hadn't traveled as far as he thought. Maybe he'd had more beers than he thought. Spotting the Wolvertons' lit farmhouse in the distance, he trudged ahead. May swayed all around him. Another gust blew through the field, fluttering the leaves and buffeting the caterpillars feasting upon them. Tommy tried to keep his eyes on the path ahead, tried to put one foot in front of the other. The sooner he delivered these damn eggs, the sooner he could clean the Pontiac, his Pontiac, and put this whole stupid night behind him. But Tommy found his gaze drawn to the periphery. He saw a lone long-haired entwined with the silk on a nearby ear of corn. It shimmered silver in the moonlight. Unsettled, Tommy backed away from the kinked, glowing threat and into a new clearing amid the crops. His legs faltered. His eyes grew wider still, for Tommy Milner encountered the scarecrow pike once again. Only this time, the large wooden stake stood empty, with Harold nowhere in sight. "What the hell?" thought Tommy as he blinked at the vacant pike in a stupor. He heard a rustle in the nearby corn rows. Tommy jumped, losing sight of the Wolverton house on the hill and his general sense of direction. It felt as if he'd wandered into one of the mazes they have at the fall harvest festivals. But fear sobered him quickly, and Tommy knew this was no carnival. Forcing himself to calm and take control, Tommy rediscovered the pathway that brought him there. He took a step, stooped, squinted. A body stood down the path. High above, the moon emerged from a cloud, and its renewed luster illuminated the cornfield. Tommy saw that the body on the path was no woman, no trick of the light, no figment of his inebriated imagination. It was Harold. The scarecrow stood on his no pike, still staring. Tommy felt warmth trickle between his legs and scrambled backward. His limbs, numb and unresponsive, tripped over each other, and Tommy fell. The eggs he'd been carrying smashed on the loamy ground. Getting back onto his feet, Tommy whipped his head around and looked back at the path. Harold stood 10 feet closer, his sutured face leering in the moonlight. Tommy's heart seized when the scarecrow took one jerky step forward. It reminded him of how a toddler learns to walk. Harold took another step, this one surer than the last. "Oh shit!" Tommy blurted. He backpedaled farther, yet Harold lurched closer, each footfall gaining in confidence. Tommy wished he'd been deployed to boot camp yesterday. He broke into a run, stomping over the broken eggs and following the path back to his parents' farm. After a few sprints, Tommy looked back over his shoulder, his vision blurred, delirious. Harold's menacing frame followed, finding its footing as it shambled ever closer to Tommy. As he turned a sharp corner, Tommy's soul skidded on the soil and flew out from under him. He tumbled hard against the ground and came to a stop mere inches from the business end of a pitchfork. The tine sparkled before his eyes, almost hypnotic in the night. Tommy shook his head and pushed himself off the dirt yet again. He studied the pitchfork, the way it had been placed across the path, almost like one of those tripwires the guerrillas used overseas. Almost like a prank. And just like that, Tommy knew what was happening. Confidence coursed through his veins as he claimed the pitchfork off the field. Those 4 peckerwoods somehow busted out of the Bellows place, and this nonsense with the scarecrow was more of their dress-up trick-or-treat horse shit. This was their pathetic version of revenge. Tommy pivoted with the pitchfork and discovered Harold right behind him on the path, right where he expected him to be. The scarecrow towered over Tommy. This had to be that tall kid, the beanpole from earlier. Ruth's turd of a brother probably helped him into the getup. Probably stuffed in extra straw so his friend looked like he had some muscle on him for once. "Whoever's in there, I'm gonna kick your ass!" Tommy shouted. Harold stared. Tommy plunged the pitchfork into the scarecrow, right into his chest. Harold stared. Removing the pitchfork with ease, Tommy goggled at its forked end. There was no blood there, just bits of straw. If this wasn't one of what's-her-name's freak show friends, then... Tommy dropped the pitchfork and bolted for his house. He felt an immediate and overriding urge to cry out for his mommy. And then he felt a strange pressure run through his chest, followed by an odd weightless feeling in his legs. Looking down, Tommy Milner saw the pitchfork protruding through his own ribs. Tommy's jaws clicked in shock, and he looked back at the straw man who had stabbed him. Harold just stared. It never occurred to Tommy how odd it was that he didn't feel pain in the moment. He merely pushed himself off the pitchfork and collapsed onto the hand-scrabbled path. He touched his perforated chest, expecting to feel his fingers slicked with crimson. But no blood issued from his wounds. In its place, hay sprouted out of the punctures. Tommy finally vomited. Nothing came out, though. "Mom?" he asked, his throat parched, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom?" He meant to call louder, but an obstruction lodged in his constricting throat. Tommy coughed and hacked. No words came out, only hay. And Harold, now inexplicably in front of Tommy, stared. Tommy wrapped his arms around his midsection and took off where the corn rose. Unripened cobs battered his face. Serrated leaves cut his skin. He became vaguely aware of an ominous shadow settling above him, like the one that enveloped the barn. Tommy was no writer, no poet, not like what's-her-name. But as he wheezed for air and tasted, not but straw on his tongue, Tommy felt like one of those dolls whose arms and legs move at the tug of a string, a doll manipulated by the darkest of hands. Barreling out of the stalks, Tommy saw his home scant yards away. He clutched at his insides, unable to give sound to the agony he felt under his flesh, and powered forward. His eyes, now spent of tears, felt dry, but still they went round at the sight of hay spilling from his sleeves and the cuffs of his jeans. More and more straw shot from his injuries, from the itchy and shredded tissues lining his nostrils, ears, and throat. Even Tommy's skin, once supple and sun-kissed from mornings spent toiling on the farm, turned coarse. His flesh took on the aspect of burlap, and his muscles and bones sublimated into dust. Tommy Milner trampled onto the earth, just shy away of his family's farmhouse. He tried to scream. With his last iota of consciousness, he swiveled his swollen head about and saw the scarecrow. And Harold stared. No, smiled.